Good morning, everybody. So, today, the title of the message is a Healing at Bethesda. And the text I want to use is John 5, 1 through 16. John 5, 1 through 16. And the purpose of the message is really to talk about how we in our lives at times feel helpless. And sometimes it's one like big situation that we just don't know how to handle, and we feel helpless in that situation. Or sometimes it's a bunch of little things that add up in our life, and we feel helpless in that situation. And who did anybody else run the Reagan yesterday? Yeah, I did too. So I was there and ran it. And so when you're running, though, sometimes you can feel hopeless and helpless as you're trying to get to up that hill. It's like, oh boy, this is rough. But so that was an experience yesterday. That's fun. But sometimes, but more seriously in life, we have these situations that arise at times that really can kind of knock us off our game, and we feel out of sorts. And one specific thing that could happen is like maybe it has to do with your house, and something goes wrong, and you have to get a repairman to come in and fix it. But you have the repair guy come in, and he says it's going to be a fortune in labor, and then the parts are extra. So if it sounds specific, it's because I just had gone through this. So yeah, so recently in my life, I've had just sometimes you have stressful things that happen, and they're spread out over the course of a year or so, and so each individual thing's not that much, but sometimes all these things kind of overlap each other, and in those situations, you're just kind of stretched, and that's kind of where I was a little, kind of recently, and I'm going through that, and then I go out to my yard, and we have this huge wooden gate that kind of meets in the middle, and so I open it, and the whole thing this side just falls flat. It's like, what? So I have no idea how to fix. It's a 6x6 beam that had rotted in the base of it, and it just toppled over. So it's like, how in the world does someone fix that? So we called somebody, and they're like, yeah, it's going to cost you a lot to replace just that beam. It's like, okay. And lumber is expensive. So now, so fortunately, though, I felt helpless in that situation. It's like, I have no idea how to handle this, and I'm busy anyway. So, like, when is this going to happen? But, I was fortunate in that I had family and friends to reference. So I came to the church, actually, and asked some guys here, and they said, this is what you should probably do. And then my father-in-law came over and, like, bought the parts and helped me. And so it was very nice, and I was blessed in that we actually got it fixed, which was good. But I had that blessing of having the resources and people I can go to ask. But it's a different type of helplessness when you don't have that. When you don't have anybody to ask, and you can't do it yourself, you're just kind of stuck. You don't know what to do with this situation. And, what that could play out as in your life, just being helpless, it could be a disability of some type. It could be some type of mental thing. It's just some type of pain that happened in your past that's just lingered on. And you've learned how to deal with it over time because it's been there for so long. And you have these things that happen in our lives, and you have the phrase that says, God helps those that helps themselves. And I get the concept behind that, but sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you don't have the ability to help yourself, and there's no one around at times that can help you either. So in that situation, we are tempted to really feel hopeless and helpless, like we can't do anything with the situation. And in our text, we find a man that's in that situation. He can't help himself, and he doesn't have anybody around that's willing to help him either. So he's just been there for a very long time. So we'll read John 5, 1 through 16. After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which is 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of the disabled, the blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and realized he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me." "Get up," Jesus told him, "pick up your mat and walk." Instantly the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. Now that day was the Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "This is the Sabbath. The law prohibits you from picking up your mat." He replied, "The man who made me well told me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" "Who is this man who told you, 'Pick up your mat and walk'?" they asked. But the man who was healed did not know who it was, because Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. After this, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Do not sin anymore, so that something worse doesn't happen to you." The man went and reported to the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore, the Jews began persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. So we see here the story of this man that was healed at Bethesda. And it intros by saying there's a Jewish festival, but that festival's not named, probably because it's not relevant to the story that much. So he just says a festival's happening. And this pool that he finds the man at is called Bethesda, which is relevant because that name means house of mercy. And this miracle happens here where mercy is shown. So that's relevant. And then he goes to the pool, and the people that are waiting here are all wanting to be healed by this pool, because they believe that what's happening at this pool, sometimes ripples would come up, and they believe it was an angel coming down and touching the water, and the first person to the pool would be healed. And so that's what they're all waiting to do, but they're all crippled, so they can't get to the water first. That's what this man is in the position of. He can't get there. You need someone else to kind of help you to it. And so they're trusting in this, and there was probably rippling happening in the pool, but it's known now that this pool is fed by a spring, outside spring. So it's pumping water into this pool. And so there would be rippling happening, but it's not an angel. Like, God doesn't work like through angels healing at pools. So we know that's not what was happening, but like the spring was feeding the pool and making these ripples, and that this superstition had been built around that they had to get to the pool to be healed. And, in water and healing kind of have been together throughout history. Like, you have the hot springs, Georgia, where people go and they'll want to sit in the hot water, and they see the mineral quality of the water and things like that. But it's probably not going to heal a paralyzed man after 38 years. And then, it says that there's 5 columns over this pool. And some people have taken that, John saying that as relating to how this pool can't heal anyone. So too the 5 books of Moses can't heal anyone. The law is a schoolmaster that brings us to God. And some people have thought that this story is, they didn't believe that this pool of Bethesda actually existed. They thought it might have been something else. But recent archaeology had found that where this pool was, they actually located it in Jerusalem, and those 5 columns really helped them to narrow down where this place was. So the reference of the 5 columns is actually pretty helpful because they've confirmed it's a real place. But Jesus comes up to this man that's at the pool wanting to be healed, and he says, "Do you want to be healed?" And the man says, "Sure, here's the superstition I believe." And he tries to tell him, this is what needs to happen for me to be healed. Now, Jesus, help me over. And that's what he wants to have happen. And then Jesus heals him instantly, but it happens to be on the Sabbath. So the man's carrying his mat. The Jews see him. Who healed you? He doesn't know. Jesus finds him later, tells him it's him, and then he reports it to the Jews that it's Jesus that healed him, and they start to persecute him. So that's the main story. And 3 things really stand out to me in that story. One is the mercy of Jesus. The second is the reaction of the Jews. And the third is the indifference of the man that was healed. Those 3 things I want to look at this morning. And the mercy of Jesus is truly on display because of the situation that the man is in. So he's been sitting there. He's trying to get this pool. He can't. And even if he did, the pool doesn't heal you. There's a whole thing. There's multiple layers of hopelessness here. And he's been there for 38 years. It's just a really long time. If you think about it, imagine you had a disability for that long that you couldn't get around. That's a long time, and that's something that you would start to build your life around. And you would have a way of doing things that included that being disabled. And that's what's happened to this man. His life has basically been built around the fact that he can't get around. And 38 years is really, if you think about the ancient world, people didn't always live to be 38. The life expectancy was not as high as it is today. Back then, you'd be fortunate to make it to 38, and this man has been crippled for that long. So it's been a very long time that this man has had to deal with this. but he has this physical ailment, but it's maybe even more significant is that he has a spiritual disablement as well. And part of that is this trusting in the pool for healing. That if someone could just get him to the pool, then he could be healed of his problems. But obviously, that's a misplaced belief. So he has this problem. And today, I think we can look at that and say, that sounds silly. It sounds kind of foolish that, getting to a pool wouldn't heal you from that type of sickness. But before we condemn him too quickly, the ancient world had some weird views on things, right? Before modern stuff and cures and research and things, people believed some weird things. So a belief that was circulating around the same time as this, and when you hear this, it'll make the pool seem sane, is there was a cure for malaria. And what this cure involved was a magic word. So you'd have a magic word to cure your malaria. But it didn't stop there. You couldn't just say the word. You had to take a piece of paper, write down abracadabra specifically 9 times, fold that up, wear it around your neck for 9 days. After the 9 days, don't miss this part, you have to throw it into an east-flowing river. And at that point, your malaria is cured. So that's circulating around the same time as this. And there's a lot of crazy, like Egyptian cures, animal fats and all types of things that won't help anything. But that's what their beliefs involved back then. So knowing that, like going to a pool seems almost like a good option. But even then, though, if you come even to more modern times, it doesn't always make much more sense. 1800s, looking at some of the cures that they had even in that time, is also kind of crazy. So one cure in the 1800s, if you have asthma, what you should do in that case is take a healthy dose of cigarette smokes. And take some cigarettes, and it'll cure you right up. Another one is if you have arthritis in your hands, what you should do is put a healthy dose of radium all over your hands, and it'll cure you. You'll be done with that arthritis. And that's the 1800s, and then they use bleeding a lot, so you lose blood. And as we're talking, Pastor John was telling me, George Washington, they bled him to heal him, and it ended up killing him because that was the cure. And that was very close to 1800 too. So these are the cures that were not that long ago, and they're still pretty out there. So we can't condemn him too quickly on this, but that's what he truly believed, was that this pool was going to be what healed him. His hope is all tied up in that. And so he's really in a hopeless and helpless situation. And if that weren't enough, short of Jesus coming to him and preaching, the only religious experience he would have is with the Jewish religion, which was all tied to that law. And so if the pool didn't work, the only other option he had was to get with the Jews and learn the law, which also couldn't heal, which couldn't save. So he's hopeless in multiple ways, in multiple layers. But Jesus finds the man, and you'll notice that the man doesn't ask for Jesus to come over. He just is laying there, and Jesus comes to him. And he says, "Do you want to get well?" And it's significant that he asked, "Do you want to get well?" Because the will is very important to have in this. Usually when a person begins to heal from something, it's the desire to want that healing that makes it gets them to start going on it and gets them to actually start trying to be healed. And it's significant that he needs to will to do it, because if he does get cured of this ailment that he's had for 38 years, his life's going to be flipped around. It's the things he used to do and how he used to make a living, that's not going to work anymore because he's not crippled any longer. So when he gets healed, he's going to have to latch onto that will for the cure to keep moving forward. You can't just lay there anymore and say, I'm crippled. It's going to be a different life for him. And so this desire to want to be healed is very, very important. Do we have the will to be healed? And being cured and being healed from these things, especially when it's been such a long time, it's going to bring change. And change can be scary. We have to, adjust to a new life. And if you think about it, all of us are kind of like this man in some way. We all have a past that of things that if they come and dwell in our mind, we can get weighed down by those things. If we dwell on them too long, it'll bring us down. And it could be a pain. It could be something that's happened in our past. It could be, some type of depression or some type of mental thing. And these things can really bring us down if we let them. And so all of us have that of some sort. For some people, it's worse. For some people, it's better. But it's true, the saying that says, into each life, a little rain must fall. Nobody gets out of this life unscathed. Like, we're all going to have some form of damage or some form of, past that we have to address, and that can latch onto us if we let it. And it's important to, sometimes the physical things, like disablements and those things, are more difficult to deal with, but with spiritual things, the Bible has guaranteed us that we can have victory in the spiritual realm. And at the end of the day, the spiritual is more important than the physical. And we'll see that in this sermon, that, the spiritual things, we have to address those because those are of eternal importance. The physical things are going to be temporary because they only last for our lifetime, but eternal life goes on forever. And that's what Jesus is offering us. And so those things are actually more important. So when we have a cure, if we're going to be cured of our things spiritually, are we ready for that cure? Can we live with the change that the cure would bring? Can we repent of the sin that we've adopted to be able to cope with the problem that's lasted us so long? We've built around this problem. Can we change all of that? Can we, if we've started to see life in a negative way, whenever something good happens, we've had such things happen in our past that we see everything in a negative light. Can we stop doing that with the cure of this and start seeing it in a more positive light? Can we get rid of the jealousy and the anger and things that attach to things that happened in the past? Can we release all of that if we were to have that cure? That's what this man is wondering. He has to have the will to do it because there's going to be a change. And when the change happens for us, it also can be very difficult. But the longer we have this pain, the longer that we've been going through it, the more difficult it can be to change. And they say there's studies that have been done that show if a person's going to be a Christian, like they need to be converted early, like as children, because as they get older, the chances get much more unlikely that that person's going to be converted. Just the way it is. Most of the time, Christians are converted as children, and hope dwindles as the person gets older. That's not always the case, because that doesn't limit God. And we probably all know of a case that we thought was hopeless. There's no way this person's ever going to be used of God. And then they do. Their life changes. God moves, and they've been, they become Christians. And God really works in their lives. And it's this type of, situation that's confronting this man. He's been here for 38 years. He's helpless. He's hopeless. But he's the one that Jesus really zeroes in and helps. But Jesus found him, and the man didn't look for Jesus, but he came to him. He took the initiative, both here and then later. The Jewish leaders come and say, "Who healed you?" He said, "I don't know who it was. He disappeared." And Jesus took the initiative again and found him and told him, "You're healed now. Go and sin no more." So Jesus took the initiative both times here. And I would encourage you to take after the example of Jesus. When you see, people in your life that seem unlikely to ever convert or to be used of God, like, be the one that does an action of love toward them or tries to get them back and tries to win them over to God. And be the one that initiates. Don't wait for them to come to you and say, "What's this Jesus thing?" But try to go out to them. And then another way you can address it is to pray. Like, pray for that person's life. And even over time, like, it could be a loved one that you're thinking of that isn't getting it. Keep praying for them, because you never know. I've heard examples even in this people in this church that have said, we prayed for this person for so long and there wasn't any hope, but then one day, boom, it just God moved in his heart and he's a Christian now. So it can happen. There's still hope as long as the person is alive. But as you read this narrative, you're probably wondering why Jesus didn't just heal everyone in the pool. So you think about it, Jesus is not limited in what he can do. He just chose this one man who didn't actually ask for Jesus to heal him. He just, he didn't even see Jesus coming, He just, once he was there, he said, "Can you bring me over to the pool?" But he didn't ask for him to come over. And so why not just do that for all the people there and say, "You're all healed, all leave and you're all done." And there's a reason why it is the way it is. Because Jesus, his ministry, as you go through the whole gospel, all the gospels, his ministry was not necessarily to heal everyone or to feed everyone. It was to make a miracle so that the attention would be on him, and then he would give a message that would address the actual importance, the situation, the spiritual things. So he'd heal the physical things so that then he could do the more important spiritual teaching that was tied to it. And that's called, one commentator called it the miracle message method. So with the feeding of the 5,000, he didn't live his whole life feeding people, even though he could have. He fed that 5,000, and then he gave a message on the bread of life. And then they came back and said, "Give us more food." And he said, "No, that's not the purpose. The purpose was the teaching." And then he heals the blind man, and he teaches on spiritual seeing. And then he talks, he heals Lazarus. He brings him from the dead. He talks about spiritual life. So all through it, we'll see this is how it goes. He has the power to heal everyone, but it wouldn't do them any good to be healed and then just go on lost, because they're going to die and then they'll be in hell, punished. And so what the true importance was to use the healing as a way to get them to understand deeper truths. And that's what Jesus' method was, to get them to understand deeper things. But a thing we can ask ourselves is, how often do we pray for someone's spiritual needs as opposed to their physical needs? And it is easier to pray for physical needs because that's what we have heard about the person. We understand that better. You can't really, the spiritual things are deeper and in their own mind, so it's not as easy to pray for that. And I think that's why we pray for physical things more. But we should take time to pray for people's spiritual needs as well, because they're more important. Their relationship to God is way more important than what's happening in their physical body. So in this story, there is a group of people that always focus on the external things, the body and the rules, more so than the soul and the spiritual things like Jesus. And they are the Jewish leaders, always talking about the minutia of the law, always really hammering down in on those things. And ironically, they are the ones that focus on the externals, and yet they weren't the ones that could heal the man at the pool. You don't see the Jewish leaders going and just healing people at the pool. Jesus could, and he was the one that focused on the internal things. But one problem is with the Jewish leaders is that they are always focused on these external things. And you'll notice in this story that you can see it in action, because the man has been laying there for 38 years. And this pool of Bethesda, the temple itself is a square, right? The pool is there, it's right there. So they're in the temple all the time, and they passed this guy for 38 years. They've seen him a bunch. And all of a sudden, he's in the temple walking around with his mat. And this, what they should do, he's healed. Let's have a party. This is amazing. Who did this? What can we do? Let's celebrate this. But instead, they see him walking, and instead of being surprised, they say, "Man, you can't have your mat in here. What are you doing? This is the Sabbath." It seems like a weird way to react to such an amazing miracle for a guy that they probably had seen a bunch, finally walking, and they react in this weird way, way out of what you would expect. And it's because they're spiritually blind, because they're hyper-focused in on these weird rules that didn't help anything, but they thought that it did. And the rules that they're mentioning do kind of exist. You can't work on the Sabbath day. Exodus 31 and Jeremiah 17 says that. But those just say you can't work. They don't get as specific as carrying a mat. To get that rule, you have to go to this thing called the Mishnah, which is how the Jewish leaders kind of went and added extra stipulations to their laws so that they would never, ever cross the line of the actual law. But they took this extra stuff as the law itself too, basically. So, and there's me and John were talking about it, there's 600 and some laws, and then the Mishnah is hundreds of pages more on top of that, saying, actually, here though, if you do this counts as that, and so they're following all of this to the letter, And they're missing huge things like miracles happening right in front of them by focusing in on this stuff. And this, this disobeying of the mat was found in the Mishnah because there's 39 extra things that are added to that law in the Mishnah. So in that 39 was the don't carry your mats. And so they pointed that out. But they're being criticized for this hyper-focus in on these minutiae of the law all throughout the book of John and in the Gospels. They're always saying, the religious leaders are doing the wrong thing. They're not focused. They're just missing stuff completely because they're too focused on the stuff that doesn't count. And as they're being criticized in the Gospels, there's an extra exclamation point that's in these stories, these criticisms, that we as modern readers don't always see because we're not as familiar with the history back then as the original readers would have been. So John wrote his gospel in like 85 AD, between 80 and 90. And the readers would have been reading it after he was done, so around like 90 AD. So they're reading this for the first time. They're seeing all these Jewish leaders get criticized. And the criticisms here have a more oomph to them because the history is in 70 AD, 20 years prior, their whole temple in Jerusalem had been completely leveled. It's all gone. So they're saying they were doing it the wrong way, and the readers are like, probably, because God really took it out on them. Like they lost everything. And in my mind, I was kind of wondering, why did Rome focus in so much on Jerusalem and the temple? It seems odd to me that like this huge empire would come in and just really level everything in this backwater town of, on the Mediterranean. And I looked up why. And I think if we understand this why they did that, it'll help us as we move through John to know as they're reading this, like this is what's already happened. And there's more oomph to these things, these criticisms. And what happened is, I just want to walk through real quickly, is it all falls in 70 AD. In 66 AD, there's Rome imposes this huge tax on the Jews, and they don't like this. So the Jews revolt, then kick out or kill the tax collectors. So they've been kicked out, and they're angry. So Rome assembles a few legions of their best soldiers, the very best in Rome, led by a general from Syria. And so they come in, and they beat people up or whatever, and that should have been the end of it, but as they're leaving, the Jewish people ambush them and kill all the legions. So some of the best legions that Rome had to offer, these backwater Jewish people had killed them all. And, that might be exciting that they've won their independence, that they can do their own thing now. They're not having to pay tax to Rome for the short term. Because basically what they've done, like, they've won, yes, but with Rome at this time, like, you might win a battle, but you're not going to win the war. Like, this is going to be bad for you. So basically all they did was their relevance to Rome was way down here, and what they did is bump themselves up to the top of the list. Like, they're number one priority now. And so actually when this all goes down in 70 AD, the emperor comes himself to Jerusalem and takes care of it. So they were never going to win this. So they just get completely wiped out. Like the temple's leveled, Jerusalem's leveled, and the temple's taken away. And so the temple was very, very important to the Jewish religion. If you read through the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses, it's all temple stuff. Like it's all talking about sacrifices and all this. But if that's taken away, what do you do then? And that's what they had, these Jewish leaders, they had to consider that. And so what they made was called Rabbinic Judaism. And that's where that was birthed, was they had to figure something out because the temple's gone. So Rabbinic Judaism, they moved forward with that. And so that's kind of the exclamation point. Like they lost everything. And so when people see that situation, they're like, if their God is, lives and everything, it seems like he was mad at them because they lost everything. And, this would make sense to them. So I thought that was just helpful to kind of understand the history there and the context that they have lost everything, and these criticisms take a little bit extra weight with them. So the Jews, the criticism involves that they're too hyper-focused in on things that don't matter. This minutia that at the end of the day doesn't matter at all. And so they would care about what the man does at the pool of Bethesda, and Jesus cares about the actual man at the pool of Bethesda, his soul. And we must be careful as Christians that we don't fall into a similar trap of just being caught up in the external minutia of Christianity and miss the big things, like showing love to the needy and helping them. If we hyper focus in and start debating on things that don't